What if everything we know about history is built on lies? Not the grand, sweeping narratives taught in textbooks, but the quiet, suppressed truths, the stories someone tried desperately to erase. Picture this, a fragile parchment, blackened at the edges, rescued from the flames of a king's wrath, a clay tablet, buried for centuries beneath the rubble of a razed city. A forbidden gospel, hidden in a desert cave by hands trembling with fear. These aren't just artifacts, they're rebels, survivors, each one a defiant whisper from the past, refusing to be silenced. For every empire that sought to control the future by burning the past, there were those who risked everything to protect these fragile threads of truth. Some were hidden in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary. Others were smuggled across borders, tucked into the belongings of travelers who knew their cargo could mean death. And then there are those that survived purely by chance, a sudden rainstorm extinguishing the pyre, a librarian's oversight, a thief who stole the wrong crate. These documents weren't meant to reach us, they were meant to vanish. So what secrets were worth killing for? What truths were so dangerous that rulers, zealots, and even time itself conspired to destroy them? From long-lost gospels that challenge religious orthodoxy to political manifestos that threatened empires, these 28 survivors rewrite history as we know it. Some reveal scandalous affairs of kings, others expose forgotten technologies or philosophies too radical for their time, and a few, they're so enigmatic, we're still unraveling their mysteries today. This isn't just a story about paper and ink, it's about the unstoppable human hunger to know, to remember. So let's begin where all great stories do, in the ashes. Buried deep in the Egyptian desert near the village of Nag Hammadi, a farmer stumbled upon one of history's most extraordinary acts of defiance, not with swords or shouts, but with clay and papyrus. In 1945, while digging for fertilizer, his blade struck something hard, a sealed jar, untouched for nearly 1,600 years. Inside lay 13 leather-bound codices, their pages filled with writings so explosive they'd been hunted, banned, and nearly wiped from existence. These were the Gnostic Gospels, texts that dared to challenge the early church's authority with teachings so radical, they threatened to rewrite Christianity itself. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas stands out, a collection of Jesus's sayings unlike anything in the New Testament. No miracles, no nativity, just raw, mystical wisdom. The kingdom of God is inside you. It proclaims, a direct challenge to the institutional power of the emerging church. Other texts, like the Gospel of Philip, hint at secret rituals and a divine spark within every person, ideas that clashed violently with the orthodoxy of the time. So dangerous were these manuscripts that bishops ordered them burned, declaring them the work of heretics, but someone, perhaps a monk, a scribe, or an entire community, refused to let them disappear. Imagine the moment they were hidden, under cover of night, hands trembling as they packed the jar, knowing discovery meant death. Why take such a risk? Because these weren't just books, they were a rebellion, a silent protest against those who sought to control what could be known, what could be believed. The Gnostics saw faith as a personal journey, not a hierarchy, and for that they were erased, or so the powerful thought. Yet here's the twist, the very act of burying these texts ensured their survival. While approved Gospels were copied and recopied, altered by generations of scribes, the Nag Hammadi Library lay perfectly preserved, waiting to be found. Now they force us to ask uncomfortable questions. What else was lost to the flames, and who decides what's sacred? The answers aren't just about history, they're about who gets to write it. The Dead Sea Scrolls might be the most famous case of history refusing to stay buried. While the Gnostic Gospels were hidden by those who feared persecution, these ancient Jewish texts were tucked away for an entirely different reason: survival. Between 68 and 70 CE, as Roman legions crushed the Jewish revolt and burned Jerusalem to the ground, someone made a desperate decision. Rather than let their sacred writings be destroyed, they carried them into the harsh Judean desert, sealing them in clay jars and leaving them in the very caves where rebels like the Essenes once hid. There they waited undisturbed for nearly 2,000 years. Then, in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad ed-Dihib threw a stone into a cave near Qumran, hoping to flush out a lost goat. Instead, he heard the sound of shattering pottery. Climbing inside, he found not an animal, but 10 mysterious jars, and inside them, the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible, along with hymns, community rules, and apocalyptic texts that would shake biblical scholarship to its core. Among the most controversial, the Book of Enoch, banned from later Jewish and Christian scripture, it describes fallen angels teaching humans forbidden knowledge, from weapon-making to astrology before being imprisoned in the abyss. Its vivid prophecies of cosmic judgment were so radical, early religious leaders scrubbed it from tradition. Yet here it was, perfectly preserved, challenging the official narrative. But the scrolls raise even bigger questions. Who exactly wrote them? The Essenes, a reclusive sect, a broader network of Jewish thinkers, and why were some texts, like the War Scroll, so focused on an impending battle between the sons of light and sons of darkness? Scholars still spar over these mysteries, but one thing's clear: these weren't just religious documents. They were a time capsule of a people under siege, clinging to faith as their world burned. What's chilling is how close we came to losing them forever. The same caves sheltered rebels during the Bar Kokhba revolt decades later. Roman soldiers surely passed by without a glance. Later, treasure hunters ransacked the area, oblivious to the crumbling parchment beneath their feet. Even after their discovery, scrolls were sold piecemeal to antiquities dealers, some used as kindling or even stuffed into shoes for insulation. That any survived is nothing short of a miracle. Now they force us to confront a haunting truth. For every text we've recovered, how many vanished without a trace? And what might those lost voices have told us about who we are and who we were meant to be? Rome's fate once hung on the words of 9 mysterious scrolls, not written by mortals, but by an ancient prophetess who saw empires rise and fall. The Sibylline Books were no ordinary texts. Legend says a cryptic old woman offered them to Rome's last king, Tarquin the Proud, at a price so steep he refused. She burned 3, then another 3. Finally, he paid full price for the remaining trio, and they became the empire's most sacred oracle. Locked in a vault beneath the Temple of Jupiter, these scrolls were Rome's emergency hotline, only consulted when plague, famine, or invasion loomed. But here's the twist: the very rulers who relied on them also feared them. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, knew their power firsthand. After a lightning strike destroyed their temple, he ordered a search for surviving fragments, then secretly burned most of what was found. Why? Because the Sibylline Books didn't just predict disasters, they shaped them. Their verses could justify overthrowing leaders, banning foreign cults, or demanding radical reforms. One prophecy famously warned of 3 Caesars, hinting at Julius's assassination and the civil wars that followed. Another allegedly predicted the rise of Christianity centuries before Christ. In the wrong hands, these words were political dynamite, yet fragments slipped through the flames. Medieval monks copying ancient texts preserved scattered lines, like pieces of a puzzle missing its box. One passage describes a virgin-born king who'd bring a golden age, eerily mirroring messianic hopes across cultures. Another warns of Rome's fall long before barbarians sacked its gates. But the most chilling, a line about a final flame that would consume the world, a prophecy later adopted by early Christians for their Book of Revelation. What's haunting is how these remnants mirror history's greatest irony. The harder powers try to erase truth, the more stubbornly it resurfaces. The Sibylline Books were meant to guide Rome's destiny, not warn of its end. Yet by trying to control them, Augustus ensured their whispers would outlive his empire. Today, their surviving fragments aren't just curiosities. They're proof that even fire can't silence a prophecy. In the quiet scriptorium of a medieval monastery, a scribe dipped his knife into a well-worn manuscript, scraping away ink that had dried centuries before. To him, it was just another sheet of parchment to reuse, a common practice when materials were scarce. But what he didn't realize was that beneath his blade lay the work of one of history's greatest minds. The Archimedes Palimpsest began its life in the 10th century as a brilliant mathematical treatise, copied painstakingly from the original Greek genius's notes. By the 12th century, it had been scrubbed clean, overwritten with prayers to create a humble devotional book. For 700 years, the ghost of Archimedes' genius lingered unseen beneath layers of pious text until modern technology dragged it back into the light. The irony is almost poetic. The very act meant to erase Archimedes turning his work into a palimpsest ended up preserving it. Parchment was too valuable to waste, so instead of burning it, they recycled it. The scribes who scraped away his diagrams on conic sections and geometric proofs had no idea they were obliterating revelations about infinity, buoyancy, and the foundations of calculus ideas so ahead of their time, they wouldn't be fully understood for another millennium. Then, in 1998, the palimpsest resurfaced at an auction, its secrets still locked beneath layers of medieval ink and glue. Scientists deployed ultraviolet light, X-rays, and even particle accelerators to tease apart the overlapping text. What emerged was staggering: Archimedes' method of mechanical theorems, a work thought lost forever, revealing how he used infinitesimals to calculate volumes, a concept that wouldn't be formalized until the 17th century. Even more astonishing, his Stomachion, a puzzle involving combinatorics, showed he was playing with ideas that foreshadowed modern computing. But the real mystery isn't just what was saved, it's why someone tried to erase it in the first place. Was it simply a pragmatic decision, a matter of scarce resources, or did the Church, wary of pagan science, quietly suppress his work? We may never know. Yet here's the twist: had the manuscript not been repurposed, it might have crumbled into dust like so many ancient texts. Instead, the prayer book's sturdy binding and careful handling by generations of monks kept it intact long enough for technology to crack its code. Today, the palimpsest stands as a testament to resilience, not just of parchment but of ideas. Archimedes' words were buried, but they couldn't be destroyed. And in that, there's a lesson. Truth has a way of outlasting the hands that try to erase it. The jungle humidity clung to the pages like a guardian's embrace as the last surviving Maya scribe tucked the codex into its hiding place. He knew the Spanish priests would come for it. They'd already torched pyramids, shattered idols, and reduced thousands of bark paper books to ash in their crusade against pagan lies. But this one, the Dresden Codex, held secrets too precious to lose. Folded like an accordion, its 78 painted pages contained the celestial wisdom of generations, calculations so precise they could predict Venus's dance across the sky centuries into the future. And that's exactly why it had to disappear. For 300 years, it lay hidden, perhaps buried in a cave, sealed in a ceramic jar, or smuggled to a remote village. Then, in the 1700s, it resurfaced mysteriously in the library of Dresden, Germany, with no record of how it got there. Scholars initially dismissed it as a curiosity until they cracked its code. The glyphs weren't just myths, they were sophisticated astronomical tables. One chart tracks Venus's 584-day cycle with near-perfect accuracy, aligning its appearances with rituals and agricultural cycles. Another predicts solar eclipses using patterns modern mathematicians later confirmed. But the most haunting page, a depiction of the cosmos crumbling, a possible prophecy of apocalyptic floods or drought tied to celestial events. Why was this knowledge so dangerous? Because the Maya didn't just observe the stars, they believed the gods spoke through them. Their priests used these tables to determine when to plant crops, when to wage war, even when to crown kings. Control the calendar and you controlled society. The Spanish understood this by burning the codices. They weren't just erasing superstition, they were severing a people's connection to time itself. Yet the Dresden Codex outsmarted them. Its survival forced a startling realization. The Maya had mapped the heavens with tools no European possessed at the time. Their calculations didn't rely on telescopes or clocks, but on meticulous observation passed down through generations. Today, it's more than a relic, it's a testament to a science that refused to be extinguished. And it makes you wonder, if this one codex survived, what other celestial secrets turned to smoke in the fires of conquest? High above the bustling streets of medieval Cairo, in the dusty attic of the Ben Ezra synagogue, a secret quietly accumulated, one scrap of parchment at a time. For nearly 1,000 years, no worn-out prayer book, no faded marriage contract, no scribbled shopping list was ever thrown away. Instead, they were reverently carried up a narrow staircase and tucked into a hidden chamber known as the Geniza. This wasn't neglect, it was devotion. In Jewish tradition, any document containing the name of God or even mundane writings in Hebrew script couldn't simply be discarded. They had to be buried or stored, treated with the same respect as sacred texts. And so, the attic became a time capsule, packed floor to ceiling with fragments of everyday life. Then, in 1896, a pair of Scottish twin sisters with a passion for antiquities overheard a rumor about this hidden trove. Agnes and Margaret Smith, self-taught scholars who could read more than a dozen languages, tracked down the Geniza and convinced the synagogue's caretaker to let them peek inside. What they found defied imagination. Not just religious scrolls, but court records, love letters, merchant ledgers, and even children's homework, all preserved in the dry Egyptian air. The sisters couldn't have known they'd just stumbled upon the most intimate portrait of medieval Jewish life ever discovered. Among the treasures was a lost poem by Moses ibn Ezra, a lyrical masterpiece thought destroyed centuries earlier. A letter from a desperate wife begging her absent merchant husband to send money home. Even a frantic note from a community leader during the Crusades, warning of approaching violence. But perhaps most astonishing was the sheer normalcy of it all. A doctor's prescription for honey and herbs, a tailor's invoice for a silk robe. These weren't grand historical narratives, they were whispers of real people, their joys and struggles etched in ink. Why does this matter? Because the Geniza didn't just preserve texts, it preserved humanity. While kings burned libraries to erase cultures, this humble attic safeguarded the messy, beautiful noise of daily existence. Every scrap contradicts the myth that history is only made by the powerful. Here, a baker's debt receipt holds as much weight as a rabbi's sermon. And that's the Geniza's real revelation. Sometimes the most radical act isn't defiance. It's simply refusing to let the ordinary be forgotten. Today, scholars are still piecing together fragments like a global jigsaw puzzle. A shopping list in Cairo might complete a torn contract from Oxford. proving medieval trade routes stretched farther than we knew. A child's doodle in the margin of a prayer book hints at how girls learn to read, and that's the magic of the Geniza. It wasn't meant for us, it was meant for eternity. A sacred promise that no life, no word is too small to save. Imagine holding a book no one on earth can read. Its pages crackle with age, filled with looping, alien script curling around paintings of plants that don't exist, tubers with human faces, flowers sprouting from spiraling stems, roots like tangled veins. Nestled between these eerie botanicals are charts of celestial spheres no astronomer recognizes, and naked women bathing in pools of green liquid connected by intricate piping. This is the Voynich Manuscript, a 400-year-old puzzle that has defied codebreakers, linguists, and even wartime intelligence agencies. But here's the real mystery. Why did this bizarre book survive at all when its very strangeness should have condemned it to the flames? The trail begins in the court of Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor obsessed with the occult. He supposedly paid 600 gold ducats, a king's ransom, for the manuscript in the early 1600s, convinced it held secrets of alchemy. Yet even Rudolf's brightest minds couldn't crack its cipher. Later owners included a shadowy alchemist who might have forged it, a Jesuit college that likely hid it from destruction during anti-occult purges, and finally, a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voinish, who stumbled upon it in 1912 in a chest of unwanted manuscripts at an Italian monastery. What makes the Voinish so tantalizing isn't just its unreadable text, it's the precision of its madness. Statistical analysis reveals patterns matching real languages, yet no known alphabet fits. The plants, while fantastical, are drawn with scientific detail, as if documenting a parallel botany. Some pages fold out into elaborate astrological charts tracking unknown constellations. And then there's the biological section, those bathing women, their bodies oddly elongated, submerged in what might symbolize bodily fluids or alchemical solutions. Was this a medical text, a cosmic map, or an elaborate joke? Theories range from plausible to fantastical. Some argue it's a lost language, perhaps a Near Eastern dialect or even an early form of constructed writing. Others insist it's an encrypted recipe book for medieval medicines, with a nonsense plant serving as code for real herbs to protect trade secrets. More controversially, a few researchers suggest it's glossolalia, the automatic writing of someone in a trance, capturing a language of the subconscious. And then there's the extraterrestrial angle, though most scholars dismiss it as wishful thinking. But the manuscript's survival is its own riddle. During the Inquisition, books on herbalism and astronomy were scrutinized for heresy. Something this blatantly odd should have been burned on sight, yet it passed through Catholic hands for centuries, almost as if its very indecipherability shielded it. No one could prove it was dangerous if no one could understand it. Today, high-tech scans reveal hidden layers, faint underdrawings, corrections, even traces of the author's fingerprints. But the words remain stubbornly silent. Maybe that's the point. The Voynich manuscript endures not despite its mystery, but because of it. In a world obsessed with answers, it's a rare artifact that still asks questions. And perhaps that's the real secret it was meant to protect all along. The whispers of the old god should have died with the last Maya priest, silenced by Spanish swords and the crackle of burning codices. But deep in the Guatemalan highlands, a secret took root, not in ink and parchment, but in memory and moonlight. The Popol Vuh, the sacred story of how the gods fashioned humans from corn and how hero twins outwitted the lords of the underworld, refused to disappear. Instead, it slipped into the shadows, passed in hushed tones between generations, until an unlikely ally emerged, a Spanish friar with a forbidden quill. By the mid-1600s, Francisco Ximenes arrived in Chichicastenango, tasked with converting the Kayich Maya to Christianity. But unlike his predecessors, he did something radical. He listened. Night after night, elders recited their ancestral stories while Ximenes transcribed them in parallel columns, Kayich on one side, Spanish on the other. The result wasn't just a translation. It was an act of quiet rebellion, a sacred text disguised as missionary work. Why would a friar preserve the very myths his order sought to erase? Perhaps he recognized their power. The Popol Vuh isn't just a creation tale, it's a cosmic roadmap. Twin brothers descending into Xibalba, the underworld, to avenge their father. Gods crafting humans first from mud too weak, then wood too soulless before finding perfection in maize. These weren't mere fables, they encoded agricultural cycles, moral codes, even astronomical knowledge. Destroying them wouldn't just erase history, it would sever a people from the rhythm of their world. The manuscript's survival hinged on deception. Ximenes's transcription was tucked into a Dominican monastery, labeled as folklore rather than scripture. Later, it vanished into private collections before resurfacing in the 1950s, just as scholars began piecing together Maya glyphs. Suddenly, the oral stories matched long unread carvings on temple walls, proving the Popol Vuh wasn't just preserved memory, but living truth. Today, it stands as a testament to resilience not of parchment, but of voice. While empires burned books, this story traveled on breath and trust, waiting for the day it could speak again. And in that, there's a lesson. Some truths are too vital to be silenced, even when the world tries to set them aflame. Deep in the highlands of Ethiopia, where the air hums with the echoes of ancient chants, there exists a book that claims to hold the ultimate prize, nothing less than the Ark of the Covenant itself. The Kebra Nagast, or Glory of Kings, isn't just a historical chronicle. It's a sacred covenant, a royal lineage, and a defiant declaration of divine favor, one so potent it fueled an empire's identity for nearly 1,000 years. But this wasn't always a story of triumph. Its survival hinged on a single, perilous night in the 1500s, when invaders swept through the kingdom, torching libraries and smashing relics. Yet one monk, clutching the manuscript to his chest, slipped into the shadows, vanishing into the rugged Simeon Mountains. Why risk everything for a book? Because within its pages lay the soul of a nation. The Kebra Nagast weaves together scripture, myth, and royal propaganda into a tapestry so compelling, it shaped Ethiopia's destiny. At its heart is the tale of Queen Makta, the legendary Sheba, and her son Menelik, born of her union with King Solomon. When Menelik journeys to Jerusalem to meet his father, the story takes a radical turn. He doesn't just return with wisdom. He smuggles out the Ark, whisking it away to Ethiopia under the cover of divine will. From that moment forward, the book declares Ethiopia's rulers are no mere kings. They're the chosen guardians of God's most sacred relic, their bloodline blessed until the end of days. This wasn't just poetic flourish. The Kebra Nagast became the cornerstone of Solomonic rule, used to legitimize emperors from Yakuno Amlak to Haile Selassie. Its prophecies were invoked to rally armies against invaders. Its covenants were read aloud at coronations, but its power also made it a target. When the Muslim warlord Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known as the Left-Handed, laid waste to Christian Ethiopia in the 1530s, his troops sought out every copy of the Kebra Nagast for destruction. They nearly succeeded. Only a handful of manuscripts survived, hidden in caves or carried by monks on treacherous journeys across war-torn lands. What's astonishing isn't just the book's endurance, it's how its promises outlasted empires. Even as Ethiopia faced colonization, famine, and revolution, the Kebra Nagast's central claim, that the Ark rests in Axum's chapel of the tablet, remained unshaken. Modern scholars debate the historical accuracy of its narratives, but that misses the point. This was never just a history. It was a weapon of resistance, a shield against cultural annihilation. When Mussolini's forces looted national treasures in the 1930s, they couldn't touch the Ark because its legend, preserved in these pages, had already made it untouchable. Today, the Kebra Nagast's legacy is etched into the very landscape of Ethiopia. Pilgrims still flock to Axum, whispering prayers to a relic they'll never see. The chapel's guardians, sworn to secrecy for life, uphold a tradition that began with a scribe's pen centuries ago. And perhaps that's the real miracle here, not whether the Ark physically resides within those walls, but that a book could forge a bond so unbreakable, even fire and war couldn't sever it. Some truths don't need proof, they just need someone brave enough to keep telling the story. Imagine writing history with one hand and ripping it to shreds with the other. That's exactly what Procopius of Caesarea did in 6th century Constantinople. By day, he was the empire's most respected chronicler, composing glowing accounts of Emperor Justinian's military conquests and the construction of the Hagia Sophia. But by night, he penned a secret manuscript so venomous, so packed with scandal, it would have meant execution if discovered. He called it Inkdota, the unpublished work. We know it today as the secret history, a bombshell so explosive, it spent a millennium buried in the shadows before daring to resurface. This wasn't just gossip. Procopius painted Justinian and his wife Theodora as monsters draped in purple silk, the emperor, a demon in human form, draining the treasury with endless wars while his spies tortured citizens for sport. Theodora, a former actress who allegedly performed lewd shows on stage before manipulating her way to the throne, where she orchestrated purges with chilling glee. Even Justinian's legendary general, Belisarius, wasn't spared. Procopius claimed the war hero was cuckolded by his own wife, who brazenly carried on affairs under his nose while he campaigned abroad. But here's the real mystery. Why write it at all? Procopius had everything to lose. Some scholars think he drafted it as insurance, stashing it away in case Justinian turned on him. Others believe it was pure catharsis, a scream into the void after years of biting his tongue. Whatever the motive, he ensured it wouldn't be found. The manuscript vanished so completely, historians began to doubt it ever existed. Then, in the 1600s, a Vatican librarian stumbled upon a single surviving copy in the depths of the Apostolic Library. The shock waves were immediate. Suddenly, the glittering facade of Justinian's reign cracked open. Procopius's claims forced a reckoning. Was this the truth behind the empire's golden age, or the bitter fantasy of a disillusioned insider? The details were too precise to dismiss entirely. He described palace intrigues no outsider could know, Theodora's secret abortions, Justinian's habit of prowling the halls at night like a restless ghost. Yet for all its vitriol, the secret history also preserved uncomfortable truths about power. The same emperor who codified Roman law also allegedly ordered the murder of dissenting senators. Theodora, a feminist icon for advancing women's rights, may have silenced rivals with poison. What's chilling is how close we came to never knowing. The manuscript survived wars, purges, and the slow rot of time purely by chance. Had that librarian not recognized its significance, Justinian's legend might have gone unchallenged. Instead, we're left with a haunting question. How many other secret histories burned before they could whisper their truths? Some silences, it seems, are louder than fire. The emerald tablet reads like a riddle wrapped in an enigma, just 13 lines of text, yet it's been called the Rosetta Stone of alchemy, a blueprint for turning lead into gold, even the key to immortality. Legend claims it was discovered in the hands of Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical sage said to be part god, part man. buried deep in a vault beneath an Egyptian pyramid. But here's the twist: the original tablet vanished centuries ago, melted down or shattered by those who feared its power. So how do we even know its words? Because alchemists, those obsessive seekers of hidden truths, refused to let it die. They memorized its verses, transcribed them in cipher, even hid them in the artwork of cathedrals. The phrase, "as above, so below," now a staple of occult symbolism, comes straight from its cryptic lines, a clue to the unity of the cosmos that resonated across cultures and centuries. What made these words so dangerous or so precious that they had to be preserved at all costs? The answer lies in the tablet's radical promise that the secrets of the universe could be unlocked through a single, universal law. Its text speaks of the one thing, a primal substance that transforms reality itself. To medieval alchemists, this wasn't just philosophy. It was an operating manual for creation. The Vatican condemned it as heresy. Kings burned copies to suppress its power, yet it kept resurfacing, scribbled in the margins of a monk's diary, encoded in the geometric patterns of Renaissance art, even whispered in the back rooms of apothecaries. Consider the risk of preserving it. In 1542, the Italian scholar Marsilio Ficino was nearly executed for translating Hermetic texts, saved only by a last-minute pardon from the Medici family. A century later, the chemist Michael Mayer smuggled the tablet's teachings into Protestant Europe by disguising them as musical compositions, each note a cipher for alchemical formulas. The most astonishing survival story, though, belongs to the Arabic version. When the Caliph Al-Ma'mun ordered the burning of all Hermetic writings in the 9th century, a Baghdad scholar named Jabir ibn Hayyan, later known in Europe as Kebra, rewrote the entire text as a recipe book, replacing the one thing with code words like the green lion and the philosopher's egg. To the untrained eye, it was just a manual for dyeing fabrics. To initiates, it was the emerald tablet in plain sight. Yet for all its influence, the tablet's greatest trick might be its ambiguity. Its famous maxim, "that which is below corresponds to that which is above," has been claimed by everyone from Enlightenment scientists to New Age mystics. Isaac Newton translated it in secret, convinced it held clues to gravity. Carl Jung saw it as a map of the human psyche. Modern physicists even find eerie parallels in quantum entanglement, where particles mirror each other across vast distances. Maybe that's why it couldn't be destroyed. The Emerald Tablet isn't just a text, it's a mirror reflecting back whatever the seeker brings to it, and in that lies its real power, not in revealing answers but in keeping us asking questions. The annals of Tacitus should have crumbled into dust centuries ago. This 1st century Roman historian's masterpiece, a blistering account of emperors like Nero and Tiberius, barely escaped the wreckage of time. Only a single manuscript survived the Dark Ages, tucked away in some forgotten monastery, its ink fading with each passing year. Then, in the 1500s, a lone scholar recognized its worth and ordered a copy made. That single act of preservation saved one of history's most unflinching chronicles of power, corruption, and the rise of an obscure Jewish sect that would reshape the world, the Christians. Tacitus wrote like a man unafraid of the truth, even when it burned. His annals strip away the propaganda of Rome's imperial court, revealing Nero not as a god king, but as a paranoid murderer who fiddled while his city burned, then scapegoated Christians for the disaster. His description of their persecution is chilling. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames. But here's what makes this passage explosive. It's one of the earliest non-Christian confirmations of Jesus' existence. Tacitus calls him Christus, executed under Pontius Pilate, whose followers carried a pernicious superstition to Rome. For a historian who loathed Christianity, his words became accidental proof of its origins. Yet the annals almost didn't make it. The sole surviving manuscript, likely copied in the 9th century, was already falling apart by the Renaissance. Water damage, bookworms, and neglect had eaten away at its edges. Then, like a stroke of fate, the humanist scholar Poggio Bracciolini, a man obsessed with rescuing classical texts, tracked it down in a German monastery. He sent it to Italy, where scribes feverishly copied its contents. Within decades, the original vanished, leaving only these fragile duplicates. Had Poggio been even a few years later, the annals might have been lost forever, taking with it irreplaceable accounts of Rome's descent into madness. What's haunting is how narrowly we avoided that silence. Without Tacitus, we'd know far less about Nero's reign, the murders, the betrayals, the Great Fire of Rome. We'd lack his searing portrait of Tiberius, rotting in luxury on Capri while Rome suffered. Most crucially, we'd lose that pivotal outsider's view of early Christianity, a movement so small and despised in Tacitus's day that no one could have imagined its future dominance. The annals remind us that history isn't just written by the victors, sometimes it's salvaged by the stubborn. A single monk's quill, a scholar's obsession, a threadbare manuscript hidden in a chest, that's all that stood between us and oblivion. And in that fragile chain of survival, there's a lesson. The past is never truly safe. It's always one generation away from vanishing. In the flickering lamplight of 11th century Kyoto, a woman known to history as Murasaki Shikibu dipped her brush into ink, unaware she was about to create something the world had never seen. Her tale, the tale of Genji, wasn't just a story. It was a revolution disguised as a romance. At a time when most literature consisted of dry chronicles or religious texts, she crafted a sprawling, psychologically intricate narrative about the radiant Prince Genji and his tangled web of love, power, and regret. But here's what's astonishing. This groundbreaking work, now celebrated as the world's first novel, survived purely because a handful of scribes refused to let it fade into silence. The odds were stacked against it from the start. Written in archaic Japanese by a noblewoman, Genji was initially dismissed as frivolous, women's writing too delicate, too emotional for serious consideration. Male scholars of the time preferred classical Chinese, the language of scholarship and state. Yet Murasaki's work defied expectations. Her prose was so vivid, her characters so achingly human, that court ladies began secretly copying chapters by hand, passing them like contraband beneath silk sleeves. These women became the novel's first lifeline, meticulously reproducing its 54 chapters on fragile washi paper, their brushes tracing every heartbreaking twist of Genji's rise and fall. Then came the real threat, time. Wars ravaged Kyoto, fires consumed palaces and their libraries. The original manuscript vanished, likely reduced to ash. But Genji had already taken root in the culture. By the 12th century, aristocrats commissioned lavish illustrated scrolls, blending text and painting into a single art form. Monks, surprisingly, became its unlikely guardians, preserving copies in remote mountain temples where samurai couldn't reach. Even when Japan closed itself off from the world in the 17th century, Genji endured, studied, debated, and even parodied in puppet plays. Why did this story outlast empires? Because it wasn't just entertainment. Murasaki's genius lay in her ability to capture universal truths beneath the veneer of courtly manners. Her scenes of moonlit poetry exchanges and secret liaisons were also sharp critiques of a society where women's fates hinged on the whims of men. When Genji's beloved Murasaki, yes, the author named a character after herself, withers away from neglect, It's not just a tragic plot twist, it's a mirror held up to a system that prized beauty but discarded the women behind it. The miracle isn't just that the tale of Genji survived, it's that it found its way back from obscurity to global acclaim. In the late 19th century, when Japan reopened to the West, scholars realized with shock that this romance predated Western novels by nearly 700 years. Today, Murasaki's masterpiece isn't just a cultural treasure, it's a testament to the quiet power of stories to outlive their creators, their eras, even the languages they were written in. And that raises a tantalizing question. How many other groundbreaking voices were lost because no one bothered to pick up a brush and copy them down? The stone pillars stood like silent sentinels across the Indian subcontinent, their surfaces etched with words meant to last 1,000 years, words that nearly vanished into the dust of history. The Edicts of Ashoka, carved in the 3rd century BC, proclaimed a startling philosophy from one of the ancient world's most powerful rulers: conquest not by the sword but by moral law. Emperor Ashoka, after witnessing the carnage of his own brutal war in Kalinga, underwent a spiritual awakening so profound he abandoned violence entirely. He ordered his transformation to be chiseled into rock and polished sandstone pillars from the Himalayas to the Deccan, declaring respect for all life, religious tolerance, and even animal rights. But here's the twist: within centuries, these radical proclamations were systematically defaced, buried, or forgotten by later Hindu dynasties eager to reclaim India's narrative. Why erase such a message? Because Ashoka's vision was dangerously subversive. In an era where kings glorified their victories in battle, he openly repented for his. His edicts didn't just preach nonviolence, they institutionalized it. He abolished hunting festivals, built hospitals for animals, and sent Buddhist missionaries as far as Greece and Egypt, all while insisting his administrators govern with compassion. To later rulers, this was an inconvenient legacy. The Gupta Empire, for instance, celebrated Hindu revivalism, and Ashoka's Buddhist sympathies didn't fit their narrative. So the pillars were toppled, their inscriptions scratched away, or worse, repurposed as building material for new temples. Then, in the 1830s, British antiquarian James Prinsep cracked the code. Working from fragments of inscriptions in a ruined stupa, he deciphered the ancient Brahmi script, unaware he was resurrecting a political manifesto lost for 2 millennia. Suddenly, Ashoka's voice re-emerged not as a conqueror but as a penitent. One edict reads like a personal confession: the slaughter, death, and deportation of people is extremely grievous. Another mandates shade trees and wells along roads for travelers, a radical notion of public welfare in antiquity. Most astonishing, his insistence that all religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, even Greek cults, deserved equal respect, a concept almost unheard of in the ancient world. The miracle isn't just that these edicts survived, it's that they found their way back to us across 2,000 years of silence. Some pillars were swallowed by jungles, their messages hidden under vines. Others were dragged away as trophies by later kings, only to be rediscovered in fragments. One was even mistaken for a magic wand by locals before scholars recognized Ashoka's script. Today, they stand as a testament to an idea too powerful to erase. That true strength lies not in domination, but in restraint. And that raises a haunting question: how many other voices from the past, equally revolutionary, were scrubbed from history without a trace? Ashoka's pillars whisper an answer. Even stone can be broken, but some truths refuse to stay buried. The wind howled like a warning as Viking longships sliced through the dawn mist toward the island of Iona in the year 806. Monks scrambled through the monastery's scriptorium, their hands shaking not from fear but from the weight of their decision, which treasures to save and which to leave to the flames. Among the chaos, one manuscript was deemed worth more than gold, the Book of Kells, a gospel so lavishly illuminated, its pages seemed to shimmer with divine light. Wrapped in linen and tucked into a leather satchel, it vanished into the night, carried by fleeing brothers across the sea to Ireland. The Vikings would burn Iona to the ground, but they'd never touch this masterpiece. What made this book worth such sacrifice? Open its pages, and you're met with a riot of color and form so precise, modern calligraphers still marvel at its craftsmanship. Tiny, interlacing spirals, some no larger than a pinhead, weave into elaborate Celtic knots. Biblical scenes burst with life, angels with rainbow wings, the Virgin Mary draped in scarlet, even a curiously playful cat pawing at mice near a gospel passage. But look closer, and the artistry reveals deeper secrets. Hidden within the swirls are geometric puzzles, mathematical ratios echoing the Fibonacci sequence centuries before its discovery in Europe. Some letters twist into animals or human faces, a visual riddle inviting the reader to meditate on each word's sacred meaning, the most mesmerizing page. The Cairo monogram, where the Greek letters symbolizing Christ explode into a kaleidoscope of patterns so intricate, scholars estimate a single page might have taken months to complete. Yet the real mystery isn't just how it was made, but why. Some speculate these illuminations were more than decoration. They were a form of coded theology. The knots, endless and unbroken, might symbolize eternity. The vibrant pigments lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold leaf from Byzantium hint at a network of trade and knowledge stretching far beyond Ireland's shores. But the Book of Kells' survival is its own miracle. After escaping Viking raids, it endured centuries in a stone church at Kells, where damp and thieves gnawed at its edges. In the 1600s, a bishop sent it to Dublin for safekeeping, only for a soldier to rip out pages as souvenirs during a rebellion. Yet through it all, the core remained intact, protected by generations who understood its value wasn't just in its beauty, but in its defiance. Every pigment-stained page whispered a truth the Vikings couldn't burn, that faith, knowledge, and art are harder to kill than men with axes. Today, it rests under bulletproof glass at Trinity College, its colors still luminous after 12 centuries. But perhaps its real legacy isn't preservation, it's resilience, a reminder that the most fragile things, when cherished, can outlast empires. Deep in the jagged caves of southern France, where the Pyrenees mountains cast long shadows, a secret lay hidden for centuries, bundles of parchment wrapped in waxed cloth, tucked into crevices so narrow, only those who knew their location could retrieve them. These were the last surviving texts of the Cathars, a group the medieval church declared so dangerous, they launched the only crusade on European soil to wipe them out. The Albigensian Crusade wasn't just a war of conquest, it was a campaign of erasure. Thousands of Cathars were burned alive, their villages razed, their libraries fed to bonfires. Yet against all odds, a handful of scrolls survived, smuggled into the darkness by hands that knew death was the price of discovery. The Cathars' so-called heresy was their belief in dualism, the idea that the material world was the creation of an evil demiurge, while the spiritual realm belonged to a true, benevolent God. To them, the Church's wealth, sacraments, and even the cross itself were corruptions. Such ideas struck at the heart of medieval power structures, and Pope Innocent III responded with terrifying efficiency. In the town of Béziers alone, 20,000 people were massacred with the chilling order, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Under this onslaught, preserving Cathar texts wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of faith. But who would dare? The answer lies in the shadowy networks of the Perfecti, Cathar spiritual leaders who lived in constant danger. Moving under cover of night, They carried their sacred writings, often copied onto thin, lightweight parchment for easy concealment, to remote caves like those at Montségur, their final stronghold. Some scrolls were tucked behind false walls in peasant homes, their owners risking torture if discovered. Others were buried with the dead, a final act of devotion. The most astonishing survival story comes from the Lombrives cave, where local legend claims a single perfecti woman guarded a trove of manuscripts for decades, living in utter isolation rather than betray their location. What did these rescued texts contain? Fragments reveal prayers, rituals, and a radical reinterpretation of Christianity that rejected the Old Testament entirely. One surviving passage describes the soul's journey through reincarnation until it achieves purity, a concept that would later resurface in Renaissance esoteric circles. Another, known as the Book of the Two Principles, lays out their stark worldview, the eternal struggle between light and darkness, with humanity caught in between. The true miracle isn't just that these scrolls endured, it's that they resurfaced at all. In the 1800s, a French antiquarian exploring Lombrives found a rotted satchel clinging to a ledge, its contents miraculously preserved by the cave's dry air. Elsewhere, shepherds stumbled upon clay jars stuffed with parchment, their wax seals still intact. Each discovery was a crack in the church's centuries-old narrative of total victory. Today, these fragments force us to ask, how many other dissenting voices were lost because no cave was deep enough, no hiding place clever enough? The Cathar's legacy whispers back sometimes, the most fragile things outlast the mightiest flames. The sandstorm came without warning, swallowing the Silk Road caravan whole as monks scrambled to secure the last wooden crate. Inside lay not silk or spices, but something far more precious: thousands of manuscripts, painstakingly copied by hand over generations. With a final prayer, they sealed the cave at Mogao, its entrance hidden beneath a fresh layer of wind-blown grit. It would be 900 years before anyone saw these texts again. The Dunhuang Library Cave wasn't just a time capsule, it was an act of desperation, a sacred trust buried beneath the shifting dunes to outlast an empire's collapse. By the year 1000, Dunhuang was a crossroads of faith and trade, where Buddhist monks rubbed shoulders with Persian merchants and Tibetan warriors. Its caves, carved into cliffs and painted with celestial murals, served as both sanctuary and library. But danger loomed from all directions. The Tang dynasty was crumbling, Muslim armies advanced from the west, and Tibetan warlords raided from the south. Faced with annihilation, the monks made a radical choice. Rather than let their sacred texts be looted or burned, they would hide them in plain sight. The cave they selected was no grand chamber, but a modest hollow barely large enough to stand in, its walls lined with scrolls from floor to ceiling before being bricked shut and painted over with a fresco of meditating monks. To any passerby, it was just another unremarkable groove in the rock face. What survived in that dark, dry cavern was nothing short of a literary miracle. Over 50,000 documents, from Buddhist sutras written in gold ink to Taoist talismans and Nestorian Christian prayers. There were marriage contracts and medical treatises, star charts and folk songs, even the world's oldest printed book, the Diamond Sutra from 868, its woodblock printed lines still crisp after centuries. But the real treasure lay in the diversity of voices preserved. Here were Sanskrit texts from India, Uyghur scripts from Central Asia, even Hebrew fragments from Jewish traders. This wasn't just a Buddhist archive, it was a snapshot of the entire Silk Road's intellectual ferment, frozen in time. The cave's rediscovery in 1900 reads like an adventure novel. A Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu, clearing sand from the caves, noticed a crack in the painted wall. Peering through, he glimpsed stacks of manuscripts reaching into the darkness. Word eventually reached Western explorers like Aurel Stein, who negotiated with Wang for bundles of scrolls, some sold for mere handfuls of silver. Though their removal sparked controversy, it also ensured the text's survival. Many that remained in China were lost to neglect or political turmoil, while those sent abroad were preserved in museums from London to Tokyo. Why does this matter? Because the Dunhuang manuscripts shattered assumptions, Buddhist scholars were stunned to find texts thought lost for a millennium, including early versions of the Heart Sutra with subtle but crucial differences from later editions. Historians pored over mundane receipts and letters that revealed everyday life along the Silk Road in vivid detail. The price of a camel, a merchant's complaint about bandits, even a child's doodled drawings in the margin of a scripture. And linguists discovered languages like Sogdian and Cotonese, once thought vanished without a trace. The cave's greatest lesson might be its humility. These monks didn't hide gold or jewels, they saved words, fragile, flammable, easily overlooked words. Yet those words outlasted armies, empires, and the very sands that once threatened to bury them. In the end, the Silk Road wasn't just a route for goods, it was a highway for ideas, and thanks to a handful of frightened monks who refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished, we can still hear those ideas whisper across the centuries. The ink had barely dried on the pages of the Codex Mendoza when French pirates intercepted the Spanish galleon carrying it across the Atlantic. Commissioned in 1541 by Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, this extraordinary manuscript was meant to be King Charles V's personal guide to his newly conquered Aztec Empire. Instead, it vanished into the shadowy world of privateers and pawnshops, its fate hanging by a thread. That it survived at all is a twist of irony, plundered by pirates, then rescued by a French king's librarian who recognized its value despite not understanding a single Nahuatl glyph. What makes the Codex Mendoza so priceless isn't just its survival, it's the story it tells. Divided into 3 sections, it's a breathtaking snapshot of Aztec civilization at the moment of collision with Europe. The first part reads like a royal resume, listing the conquests of each Aztec emperor with vivid illustrations of toppled temples and vanquished cities. One panel shows the legendary founder Tenoch planting his spear in the marshy ground where Tenochtitlan would rise, while another depicts Moctezuma II receiving tribute from far-flung provinces, jade, quetzal feathers, even live eagles bundled in cages. But it's the second section that pulses with life, a meticulous record of taxes paid by conquered regions, from bags of cocoa beans to bundles of cotton, each item rendered in vibrant pigments. The real heartbreaker, though, is the third part, a glimpse into everyday Aztec life before the world shattered. Here, children are shown learning trades, boys fishing or carving wood, girls grinding corn or weaving. A wedding is depicted with the couple tied together by cloaks, while punishments for drunkenness include public head shaving. These scenes weren't drawn by Spanish hands, but by Aztec scribes or tlacuilos who worked under immense pressure to translate their world for foreign eyes. The tension is palpable in the artwork, the bold, flowing lines of traditional Aztec style, occasionally cramped by European compositional rules imposed by the Spanish friar overseeing the project. For 3 centuries, the Codex gathered dust in obscurity. After piratical hands snatched it from the sea, it passed through shadowy collectors before landing in the library of King Louis XIV's finance minister. There, it sat unread until a scholar named Lorenzo Boccherini, himself a fascinating figure who married a Nahua noblewoman, recognized its significance in the 1700s. By then, smallpox, war, and forced conversions had erased much of the knowledge the Codex preserved. Today, it's a palimpsest of survival. The pirate raid that should have doomed it instead saved it from potential destruction in Spain, where other Mesoamerican codices were burned as pagan nonsense. Its very existence forces us to confront a paradox that sometimes the greed of those who care nothing for history becomes the unlikely guardian of memory. And in its pages, a civilization speaks not through the conqueror's filters, but in the defiant strokes of artists who refuse to let their world be forgotten. The same hands that penned the tale of Genji, the world's first novel, also kept a secret diary, its pages filled with quiet frustrations, sly observations, and the raw loneliness of a genius. Lady Murasaki Shikibu's personal journal should have been lost to time. In an era when women's writings were dismissed as frivolous, her private musings were nearly tossed aside like yesterday's cherry blossoms. Yet by some miracle, a single copy survived, tucked away in a noble family's collection for centuries before scholars realized what they had. An intimate backstage pass to the mind of a literary pioneer. Her diary cracks open a window onto 11th century Kyoto's imperial court, where Murasaki served as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shoshi. But this isn't just gossip from the chrysanthemum curtain. Between complaints about tedious ceremonies and snarky remarks about rival courtiers, she drops breathtaking insights into her creative process. One passage describes lying awake at night, mentally composing scenes for Genji while watching moonlight glide across the palace walls. Another confesses her fear that men would dismiss her work as women's foolishness, a fear that proved tragically prescient when male scholars later ignored her legacy for centuries. What's most striking, though, is her ambivalence toward the very world she immortalized. Murasaki portrays the court as a gilded cage, its rituals stifling and its politics petty. She mocks the vanity of aristocrats preening in their multi-layered robes, yet also admits her own loneliness when excluded from their circles. This tension between insider and outsider, participant and critic fuels Genji's psychological depth. When Prince Genji agonizes over societal expectations or masks his true feelings behind a carefully composed poem, we're seeing Murasaki's own struggles refracted through fiction. The diary's survival is its own minor miracle. Unlike Genji, which was copied and recopied by devoted fans, her journal existed in just a few fragile manuscripts. At some point, someone deemed it worth preserving. Perhaps a descendant, maybe a fellow lady-in-waiting who recognized its value. Whoever they were, they saved more than just personal reflections. They preserved a rare blueprint of creativity itself, the messy, vulnerable humanity behind a masterpiece. We see Murasaki doubting her talent, grumbling about writer's block, even confessing she sometimes scribbled nonsense just to keep her brush moving. These aren't the polished confessions of a literary icon, but the real-time stumbles of a working writer. Today, the diary forces us to confront how much we've lost by dismissing women's writing as insignificant. Murasaki's contemporaries wrote official histories and Chinese-style poetry genres considered serious and masculine. Her diary, with its focus on emotions and daily life, was deemed trivial. Yet it's precisely these intimate details that help us understand Genji's revolutionary empathy. When Lady Rokujo's jealousy curdles into vengeful rage in the novel, or when young Murasaki, the character named after her, navigates the suffocating expectations of courtly life, we're witnessing the author's own keen observations transformed into art. The greatest irony, Murasaki's diary outlived the important male-authored chronicles of her era. While official records crumbled or were lost to war, her private words endured, a testament to the quiet power of authenticity. In one poignant entry, she watches crows gathering at dusk and muses on the transience of life. It's a moment any modern diarist might recognize, the urge to capture fleeting beauty before it vanishes. That she did so with such clarity, knowing her voice might never be valued, is its own kind of rebellion. The diary's survival whispers back across 1,000 years. The personal isn't just political, it's eternal. Mary Magdalene's gospel didn't burn, it shattered. Unlike the neatly bound codices of Nag Hammadi, her story survived in tattered fragments, some no larger than a postage stamp, scattered across continents like breadcrumbs leading back to a forbidden truth. One scrap turned up in a dealer's shop in Cairo, another in a German university's forgotten archive, and most astonishingly, a third was found tucked inside the binding of a medieval tax ledger, recycled as scrap parchment. Each fragment whispered the same radical message. Mary wasn't just a follower of Jesus, she was his closest confidante, the apostle to the apostles, the one who understood his teachings when others faltered. Why was this gospel so dangerous? Because it challenged the very architecture of early Christian power. In the Gospel of Mary, discovered in 1896 but ignored for decades, Peter, the rock upon whom the church was built, appears jealous, demanding, "Did Jesus speak privately with a woman and not openly to us?" Mary responds with quiet courage, recounting visions of the soul's ascent past hostile cosmic forces. This wasn't just theology, it was a threat. By the 4th century, church leaders like Pope Gregory I had recast Mary Magdalene as a penitent prostitute, erasing her spiritual authority. The gospel that bore her name was banned, then hunted. Yet the fragments endured, saved by hands we'll never fully credit. Some scholars suspect Coptic monks smuggled them out of Alexandria before the great library's destruction, hiding them in plain sight among less controversial texts. Others believe they were preserved by heretical sects like the Bogomils, who passed them down in secrecy across generations. The most tantalizing clue lies in a 9th century letter from a Byzantine bishop complaining about women who preach from apocryphal scrolls, suggesting these forbidden texts never truly disappeared, they just went underground. The real miracle isn't that these fragments survived, it's how they resurfaced. In 2012, a collector opened an antique frame in Zurich and found a sliver of Greek text stuck to the backing, a previously unknown line from the Gospel of Mary. Carbon dating placed it in the 3rd century, making it the oldest extant copy. The verse, "The kingdom is within you," a phrase so simple, so subversive, it explains why emperors and bishops feared a woman's gospel more than any army. They could burn the parchment, but not the idea. That divinity isn't handed down through hierarchies, it's kindled in the soul, and that's a truth no flame can erase. The Rosetta Stone was never meant to be a treasure. When French soldiers uncovered it in 1799 while rebuilding a fort near the Nile Delta, it was just another slab of black basalt, roughly the size of a tablet, and already earmarked for reuse as construction filler. Its face, once polished smooth, had been partially scraped away. Centuries of laborers had eyed it as convenient raw material, chiseling off chunks for mortar or grinding down its surface. Another few years, and it might have vanished entirely, reduced to rubble in some anonymous wall. Instead, it became the most important linguistic key in history, cracking open a script that had baffled scholars for over 1,000 years, Egyptian hieroglyphs. What makes the Rosetta Stone extraordinary isn't just its trilingual inscription, a decree from 1960 BC praising Pharaoh Ptolemy V in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic script. It's the sheer improbability of its survival. After Napoleon's defeat in Egypt, the stone was seized by the British as war booty under the Treaty of Alexandria. Packed in a crate and shipped to England, it nearly sank in a storm off the coast of Malta. Yet when it finally reached the hands of scholars like Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, its true power emerged. For the first time, researchers had a Rosetta Stone, a term now synonymous with decoding, that allowed them to match known Greek words with their ancient Egyptian counterparts. Champollion's breakthrough came in 1822, when he realized hieroglyphs weren't just pictograms but a complex mix of phonetic and symbolic elements. The cartouche and oval enclosing royal names proved pivotal. By comparing the Greek Ptolemy to its hieroglyphic rendering, he identified phonetic sounds for certain symbols, unlocking names like Cleopatra and eventually the entire system. Without the Rosetta Stone, this linguistic revolution might never have happened. Temples like Karnak and the Book of the Dead would have remained silent, their stories trapped behind unreadable glyphs. But the stone's journey didn't end there. During World War II, as German bombs rained on London, curators at the British Museum moved it to an underground railway tunnel for safekeeping. Even today, debates simmer over its ownership. Egypt has repeatedly requested its return, while the British Museum argues its global significance justifies its presence in London. Yet beyond the politics, the stone's real legacy is its defiance of time. Nearly ground to dust, shuffled between empires, and bombarded by war, it endured long enough to resurrect a lost language. And in that, it whispers a humbling truth. Sometimes the key to understanding our past isn't some grand monument. It's the overlooked fragment, the discarded relic, the stone someone almost threw away. The clay tablets lay broken for centuries, scattered across the ruins of Nineveh like the bones of some forgotten giant. When British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard uncovered them in the 1840s, they were little more than cracked fragments, their wedge-shaped cuneiform script worn smooth by time. No one could have guessed these shattered pieces held humanity's first great epic, a story so old it predates Homer by 1,000 years, and so universal, its themes echo in every hero's journey since. The Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't just a poem, it was a time capsule buried by war and rediscovered by sheer luck, waiting to whisper its secrets across the millennia. Deciphering it was like solving the world's hardest jigsaw puzzle. Scholars painstakingly matched edges of tablets from different sites, some from Assyrian King Ashurbanipal's library, others from distant Babylonian temples. The most crucial fragment turned up in a dealer's shop in Baghdad, where a self-taught linguist named George Smith recognized a line about birds circling above the waters. It was the flood story, eerily similar to Noah's Ark but written centuries before Genesis. Smith reportedly tore off his jacket in excitement, shouting, "I am the first person to read this in 2,000 years." But Gilgamesh is more than just a biblical parallel. It's the story of a tyrant transformed by grief, a king who fears death so deeply, he abandons his throne to seek eternal life. His journey takes him through cedar forests guarded by a monstrous Humbaba, across the waters of death with the only man who ever cheated it, Utnapishtim, the flood survivor, and finally back to his city of Uruk, empty-handed but wiser. The epic's conclusion is startlingly modern. Immortality lies not in living forever, but in what we build, what we love, and how we're remembered. What's miraculous isn't just that the epic survived. It's how close we came to losing it forever. The tablets were baked in the very fire that destroyed Nineveh in 612 BC, their clay hardening like ceramic in the heat, a disaster that inadvertently preserved them. Later, looters nearly ground them into powder for medicinal use, believing ancient dust held curative powers. Even after their discovery, World War II bombings threatened the museum where they were stored. Yet each time fate intervened. A single line from the epic captures the irony. The gods took back what they gave, but left us the story. Today, Gilgamesh's legacy is everywhere, from the hero's journey template in modern films to psychology textbooks citing his friendship with Enkidu as literature's first portrayal of deep male bonding. But perhaps its greatest gift is perspective. When the epic was written, the pyramids were already ancient history. That's how old our hunger for meaning is. And thanks to a handful of cracked clay tablets, that hunger and the stories it spawns will never be forgotten. The forests of Montségur still whisper of treasure. When the last Cathar stronghold fell in 1244, legend claims a small group slipped away under cover of darkness, carrying something more precious than gold, sacred relics that held the essence of their forbidden faith. Some say it was the Holy Grail itself. Others speak of a book containing Jesus's lost teachings, or even emerald tablets inscribed with divine wisdom. These weren't just objects to the Cathars, they were physical manifestations of their belief that the material world was a prison and true divinity lay beyond. The most tantalizing clue comes from a single line in an inquisitor's report, noting that 4 perfecti, Cathar spiritual leaders, descended the mountain's steepest cliff the night before the surrender. They were never seen again, but local shepherds later spoke of strange lights in the caves of Ornolac, miles from Montségur. Centuries later, archaeologists found a rusted iron box in one of those caverns, its interior lined with wax, as if to protect fragile contents from dampness. The box was empty, but the craftsmanship matched known Cathar metalwork. Then there's the mystery of the Château de Usson. In the 1950s, a farmer plowing his field near the ruined fortress struck a hollow chamber beneath a slab of rock. Inside were 7 copper scrolls, etched with symbols eerily similar to those in surviving Cathar fragments. Before scholars could examine them, the scrolls vanished, likely sold to a private collector. But a blurred photograph survived, showing one phrase, La lutte is dins, the light is within. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in plain sight. The tiny village of Rennes-le-Château, long suspected of hiding Cathar secrets, holds a bizarre architectural clue. Its 19th-century priest, Bérenger Saunière, suddenly became wealthy after discovering something in the church. He then commissioned a series of cryptic murals, including one depicting Mary Magdalene holding a vase, a possible Grail symbol, while a hidden compartment in his altar contained a parchment with the same phrase found in the Ornolac cave. Why does any of this matter? Because relics weren't just keepsakes to the Cathars, they were keys to salvation. Their survival would mean that despite fire and sword, their most dangerous idea endured. That divinity isn't mediated by priests or churches, but carried in the human soul. And that's a treasure no pyre can destroy. The peat-stained fingers of Toland man still curl inward, as if cradling something precious even in death. When archaeologists first lifted his 2,000-year-old body from the Danish bog in 1950, they found more than just a remarkably preserved face. They found a mystery. His posture suggested he'd been holding an object when he died, something organic that had dissolved into the acidic water, leaving only a ghostly imprint in the mud. Was it a weapon, a talisman, or something far more fragile, a scroll? Across northern Europe, from Ireland to Germany, dozens of bog bodies have been discovered with similar voids in their clenched hands. Some show traces of plant fibers or faint stains that hint at parchment. The most compelling case comes from Winderby in Germany, where a teenage girl's remains were found with a decomposed rectangular bundle near her chest, its dimensions matching those of ancient wooden writing tablets. These bog librarians, as some scholars call them, may have been more than victims of ritual sacrifice. They could have been couriers, safeguarding knowledge too dangerous to entrust to the living. Consider the bogs themselves, nature's perfect vaults. Their cold, oxygen-poor waters slow decay to a crawl, preserving skin, hair, and even last meals with eerie clarity. But there are also liminal spaces straddling land and water, life and death. To Iron Age peoples, these wetlands were sacred thresholds where offerings were made to gods. What better place to conceal forbidden texts? A scroll submerged here wouldn't just be hidden, it would be given to the earth itself, protected by the same forces that kept the dead eerily intact for millennia. The real tragedy isn't just that these texts dissolved, it's what their existence implies. Unlike stone carvings or temple inscriptions meant to endure, these were likely personal writings, legal disputes, family histories, or spiritual revelations. The Roman historian Tacitus mentions Germanic tribes using runes for divination, while later Norse sagas describe blood letters inscribed on bark. Could the bog scrolls have contained similar secrets? A clan's stolen lands documented before a chief's murder, a heretical prophecy suppressed by druids. The acidity that preserved these bodies also erased their stories, leaving us with only the faintest whispers, yet fragments survive in unexpected ways. In 2018, Danish researchers analyzing bog chemistry near a discovery site found abnormally high levels of tannins mixed with traces of iron gall ink, the same ink used in medieval manuscripts. Nearby, a carved wooden rod bore notches matching Celtic calendar symbols. It's as if the landscape itself remembers what the water took. What makes these vanished texts haunt us isn't just their loss, but their defiance. These weren't scrolls stored in libraries or buried in chests. They were clutched in dying hands, carried to the grave by those who refused to let them go. Whether they held legal proof of stolen inheritance, verses to forgotten gods, or maps to hidden sanctuaries, their message is clear. Some truths are worth gripping tightly, even as the bog claims you. And in that final, desperate embrace, they achieved a kind of immortality, not through preservation, but through the unshakable determination to be remembered. The villa's library was still smoldering when the first tremors hit. In 79 CE, as Vesuvius buried Herculaneum under a pyroclastic surge hotter than 300 degrees Celsius, the prized scrolls of Julius Caesar's father-in-law didn't burn, they baked. The heat carbonized them instantly, turning entire shelves into what looked like lumps of charcoal. For centuries, these brittle relics crumbled at the slightest touch, their secrets locked behind layers of volcanic ash and their own blackened shells. But what seemed like history's cruelest irony, preserving knowledge only to render it unreadable, has become one of its most astonishing second chances. Today, with the help of artificial intelligence and cutting-edge imaging, these scrolls are finally whispering their secrets, and what they're revealing could rewrite our understanding of ancient philosophy. The Herculaneum papyri aren't just old, they're a time capsule from the height of Roman intellectual life. The villa they were found in, likely owned by Lucius Calpurnius Piso, was a gathering place for thinkers, including the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus, whose works on ethics, poetry, and theology were thought lost forever. When excavators first uncovered the scrolls in the 1700s, they tried everything to unroll them: mercury baths, heat treatments, even slicing them vertically like deli meat. Most methods destroyed more than they revealed. A single scroll might yield a few fragmented lines before disintegrating, leaving scholars to piece together philosophy like a jigsaw puzzle, missing 90% of its pieces. Then came the breakthrough. In 2015, a team led by Dr. Brent Seals at the University of Kentucky developed a virtual unwrapping technique using high-energy X-rays from a particle accelerator. The scans mapped the scroll's internal structure, detecting subtle variations in the carbonized ink. But the real game changer was AI. machine learning algorithms trained on known Greek texts began predicting letter shapes hidden beneath the layers, like a linguistic archaeologist brushing away volcanic dust 1 pixel at a time. The first fully decoded scroll fragment, revealed in 2023, contained a previously unknown work by Philodmus, a fiery critique of rival philosophers, his wit preserved perfectly across 2 millennia. What makes these texts so revolutionary isn't just their content, but their context. The villa's library was a private collection, untouched by the censorship or editorial biases that shaped much of surviving classical literature. Early readings suggest debates on topics as varied as the nature of pleasure, a core Epicurean idea, and the role of rhetoric in politics, subjects that feel startlingly modern. One partially translated passage argues against blind allegiance to authority, declaring, "Truth belongs to those who question, not those who obey." Another, still being deciphered, may contain a lost dialogue by the philosopher Democritus on atomic theory, predating modern physics by 2,000 years. The most tantalizing possibility, the villa's lower levels remain unexcavated, and ground-penetrating radar hints at another library beneath the ash. If even a fraction of those scrolls survive, they could reshape our knowledge of antiquity. Imagine recovering complete versions of Sappho's poetry, Aristotle's lost dialogues, or early Christian texts written before the New Testament's canonization. The potential is staggering. Yet the real lesson of the Herculaneum papyri isn't just about the past, it's about resilience. These scrolls endured a volcano's fury, centuries of misguided handling, and the slow creep of oblivion, only to find their voice in the digital age. They remind us that knowledge once unleashed is nearly impossible to erase, even when buried under ash or time or the weight of our own assumptions. It waits patiently for the light. And sometimes all it takes to hear it speak is someone willing to listen in a new way. Sophocles wrote like a man possessed, 120 plays spun from his pen, each one a thread in the tapestry of ancient Greek drama. Yet today, only 7 survive intact, the rest reduced to fragments scattered like broken pottery across the ruins of history. Imagine the scale of that loss, not just a handful of forgotten stories, but an entire universe of tragic heroes, divine interventions, and moral dilemmas that shaped Western thought. The surviving scraps tease us with glimpses of what vanished, a line about a man who danced on the shore of fate, a stage direction describing a chorus of mourning winds, even a rumor of a play where the Furies themselves took center stage. How did these 7 defy oblivion while the others crumbled into silence? The answer is equal parts luck, sabotage, and the stubbornness of school teachers. Athens in the 5th century BCE was a playwright's battlefield. Competitions at the Dionysia festival were fierce, with Sophocles winning more often than any of his rivals. His works were copied and performed across the Mediterranean, but papyrus is fragile and empires fall. The real culling began in Byzantium. Medieval monks tasked with preserving classical texts made ruthless choices, prioritizing works that aligned with Christian morals or served as rhetorical models. Sophocles' Oedipus Rex survived because its themes of fate and guilt resonated with theologians, while plays like the Commission's, a rumored comedy about satyrs, were deemed frivolous and left to rot. Even then, the 7 we have nearly didn't make it. A 10th century manuscript known as the Laurentian Codex, hidden in a Florence monastery, became their lifeline, its pages so precious that scribes scraped and rewrote over other texts to save parchment. But fragments tell their own haunting tales. In 1896, archaeologists excavating Oxyrhynchus in Egypt uncovered a rubbish heap packed with papyri tax receipts, shopping lists, and, miraculously, lines from Sophocles' Lost Terriers. The play, based on a myth of rape and mutilation, was so controversial that Aristotle cited it as an example of tragedy's power to disturb. Another shred, preserved in the binding of a medieval Bible, preserves a choral ode from Niobe where the titular queen, punished for arrogance, weeps as her children are slain by Apollo's arrows. The god's envy cracks the world like a cup. These aren't just broken lines, they're windows into a Sophocles far darker, more daring than the sanitized versions preserved by tradition. The greatest loss might be his revolutionary innovations. Ancient sources hint he wrote a trilogy where the chorus played the protagonist, breaking all conventions of passive commentary. Another fragment describes a play staged entirely at night, unheard of in open-air Greek theaters. Even his surviving works suggest radical experiments. Philoctetes, with its focus on a wounded soldier's pain, feels shockingly modern, while Antigone's clash between divine and human law still sparks debates. What might his other 113 plays have dared to try? Yet there's a twist in this story of loss. In 2018, multispectral imaging revealed previously invisible text on a reused palimpsest in a Vatican library. Beneath layers of psalms, scholars detected meter and phrasing unmistakably Sophoclean, possibly a scene from the Syrians, a play about Odysseus's secret mission to recruit Achilles. It's a reminder that the past isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting, pressed between the pages of time for the right light to shine through. Buried beneath floorboards, bricked into cellar walls, and tucked into the hollowed-out spines of prayer books, the archives of the doomed took shape. As Nazi forces tightened their grip on Jewish ghettos across Europe, a quiet rebellion unfolded not with weapons, but with pen and paper. In Warsaw, Vilna, and Lodz, historians, poets, and ordinary citizens became archivists of the apocalypse, meticulously documenting their crumbling world, knowing they might not live to see its recovery. These weren't just diaries or letters, they were time capsules engineered to outlast their creators, stuffed with theater tickets and ration cards, children's drawings and underground newspapers, even tram schedules that captured the rhythm of daily life before the world went dark. The most extraordinary effort centered around a young historian named Emanuel Ringelblum, who turned his tiny Warsaw apartment into the nerve center of the Voynich Manuscript, joy of the Sabbath archive. His team, teachers, journalists, even a milkman who used his routes to smuggle documents, collected over 35,000 pages of testimony. They buried them in metal boxes and milk cans, 3 separate caches beneath the ghetto's tenements. One entry captures their urgency, a schoolgirl's essay titled, "Why I'm Afraid of the Night," tucked beside a SS officer's confiscated memo ordering the liquidation of a nearby village. The archive didn't just record facts, it preserved the human heartbeat behind them. But Ringelblum's trove was just the beginning. In the Vilna ghetto, poet Avrom Sutskever and his paper brigade risked their lives in a surreal dance with Nazi looters. Tasked with sorting Jewish books for shipment to Germany's planned Museum of an Extinct Race, they secretly smuggled priceless manuscripts into the ghetto, medieval poetry, Yiddish plays, even letters from the Vilna Gaon, the 18th century Talmudic genius. Some were sewn into coats, others hidden in false-bottomed crates marked medical supplies. Their greatest coup, spiriting away the original minutes of the Vilna Jewish Council from the 17th century, a tangible thread to a world the Nazis sought to erase. What makes these caches so revolutionary is their intentional diversity. Unlike traditional archives curated by scholars, these collections embraced chaos, a candy wrapper from a child's last birthday, a recipe for mock goose made from potatoes when meat vanished, a hand-drawn map of hiding places. In Lodz, archivists included samples of the ersatz ghetto coffee, brewed from acorns, its bitterness preserved like a chemical testament to hunger. These weren't relics, they were counter-narratives, proof that even in the face of systematic dehumanization, people insisted on being remembered as more than victims. Yet for every cache found, others haunt us with their absence. Rumors persist of a trove buried beneath Bialystok's great synagogue, containing Chagall's early sketches and rare Kabbalistic texts. In Thessaloniki, where Sephardic Jews had lived since the Spanish Inquisition, locals whisper of Torah scrolls walled up in the old Jewish quarters' basements, but post-war urban development sealed them forever beneath concrete. Most heartbreaking are the living archives, oral histories entrusted to non-Jewish neighbors who either couldn't or wouldn't preserve them after the war. A survivor's memoir from Kovno describes burying a tin of family photos in the local Catholic cemetery, only to return in 1945 and find the ground paved over for a Soviet memorial. The miracle isn't just what survived, it's how these fragments rewrite history. Ringelblum's milk cans, dug up in 1946 and 1950, revealed the ghetto's clandestine schools, its thriving black market orchestras, even the jokes circulated to mock Nazi propaganda. What's the difference between the sun and Hitler? The sun rises in the east, Hitler sinks in the east. Without them, we might have only the Nazis' clinical records of resettlement. Instead, we hear a mother singing her child to sleep in Yiddish, the scratch of a chronicler's pen as he notes the price of bread on the eve of deportation, the rustle of leaves pressed into a diary as a final memory of summer. These archives whisper a truth louder than any monument. That memory is the last frontier of resistance. When the SS dynamited the Warsaw Ghetto into rubble, they never imagined words could outlast concrete. But in a quiet corner of the Jewish Historical Institute today, a child's watercolor of a yellow star still glows with defiant brightness, not because it survived the war, but because someone believed against all odds that it deserved to. The desert wind carried more than sand the night the jihadists came for Timbuktu's libraries, as militants brandishing torches and power drills stormed the Ahmed Baba Institute in 2012, shouting that its treasures were un-Islamic. A secret network of librarians and shopkeepers had already sprung into action. For months, they'd been preparing for this moment, quietly emptying shelves, wrapping fragile manuscripts in cotton cloth, and smuggling them out in rice sacks, vegetable crates, and even the false bottoms of donkey carts. By the time the world watched in horror as extremists burned over 4,000 books on camera, the real treasures were already vanishing into the labyrinthine alleys of Timbuktu, one daring trip at a time. What made these manuscripts worth risking lives for? Open one of the rescued pages, and you'll find revelations that shatter stereotypes about pre-colonial Africa. Take the 17th century Tariq al-Sudan, a history of the Songhai Empire that meticulously documents astronomical observations, legal codes, and even a thriving trade in gold and salt that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Gulf of Guinea. Or the Letters of the Sudan, a collection of diplomatic correspondence showing how West African rulers negotiated with sultans as equals, not subjects. These weren't just local records, they were proof of a sophisticated intellectual tradition that flourished while Europe was still clawing its way out of the Middle Ages. The most astonishing part, the rescue operation was orchestrated using methods straight out of the manuscripts themselves. Abdul Qadir Haidara, the librarian who masterminded the evacuation, studied centuries-old caravan routes described in the very texts he was saving. He knew which desert paths could evade checkpoints, which river crossings were safest at night. Some manuscripts traveled in refrigerated trucks to protect them from the heat. Others were hidden in boats navigating the Niger River's maze of tributaries. One particularly precious 12th century Quran, its ink made from crushed gemstones, was disguised as a bundle of firewood on a woman's back, but the real bombshells lie in the content. Amidst the expected religious texts are treatises that rewrite history. A 15th century medical manual details cataract surgeries performed with hollow needles centuries before Europe mastered the technique. Another scroll outlines a complex system of algebra used to calculate inheritance shares, complete with margin notes debating its finer points. Perhaps most revolutionary is the Timbuktu Astronomy, a work so precise it accurately predicted lunar eclipses in 1593 using calculations based on the Earth's curvature. This wasn't just knowledge, it was science, philosophy, and law operating at levels the Western world wouldn't match for generations. Why did the extremists fear these old books so much? Because they contradicted the narrative of Africa as a blank slate waiting for civilization. The manuscripts proved Timbuktu had universities when Oxford was still a backwater, that its scholars debated Aristotle in Arabic and Songhai, that its judges upheld women's property rights in divorce cases. In a single rescued letter, a mother advises her scholar son to seek knowledge even in China, a radical idea of education's value in the 14th century. Today, over 300,000 manuscripts survive in private homes and makeshift libraries, their pages still being digitized and studied. Some bear water stains from river crossings, others the faint smell of spices used to ward off insects during their exile. But their greatest scars are invisible, the gaps left by what couldn't be saved, the burnt fragments that drift through Timbuktu's alleys like phantom limbs, reminding us that every rescued page is both a victory and a memorial. The extremists thought they were erasing history. Instead, they proved its indestructibility one stubborn donkey cart at a time. From flames to floods, censorship to conquest, these 28 records didn't just survive by chance. They endured because someone, somewhere, refused to let them vanish. A monk hiding a gospel in a jar, a librarian smuggling manuscripts in donkey carts, a historian scribbling truths in the shadow of genocide. Each act of defiance, large or small, became a stitch in the tapestry of human memory. What makes these survivals so extraordinary isn't just their age or rarity, but the sheer improbability of their persistence. Think about it. For every Nag Hammadi library that escaped the flames, how many were reduced to ash? For every Dead Sea Scroll tucked safely in a cave, how many crumbled into dust? History isn't just written by the winners, it's rewritten by the stubborn. The Cathar scrolls buried in French caves, the Maya codices disguised as firewood, the Jewish archives sealed in milk cans, these weren't passive survivors. They were active rebels protected by hands that understood a simple, radical truth. Knowledge is power, and power is never surrendered willingly. When empires burn books, it's not just words they're trying to erase, it's the ideas that threaten their control. The Kebra Nagasts claim to the Ark of the Covenant, the Gospel of Mary's challenge to apostolic authority, the Sibylline prophecies that rattled emperors. These weren't just texts. They were landmines buried in the past, waiting to detonate in the future. Yet here's the paradox, the very forces that sought to destroy these records often inadvertently preserved them. The volcano that carbonized the Herculaneum papyri also fossilized their words. The Viking raids that scattered the Book of Kells across Ireland ensured its artistry would outlast political upheavals. Even the Rosetta Stone, nearly ground into mortar, was saved by the chaos of war and the whims of thieves. Destruction and preservation aren't opposites, they're locked in a dance, each shaping what remains. So what do these survivors ask of us? To listen closely, to question fiercely, and to remember that every official history hides whispers of what was almost lost. The next time you read a textbook or watch a documentary, ask yourself, What's missing, whose voices were silenced, and what might still be waiting, buried in a cave or pressed between the pages of an old book, ready to rewrite the story we think we know. Now it's your turn. Which of these survivals shocked you the most? Was it the Gnostic Gospels, hidden for 16 centuries, the Cathar scrolls, guarded by a lone woman in a cave? Or maybe the Voynich manuscript, still taunting us with its unreadable secrets? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're all detectives piecing together history's greatest mysteries. And if you're hungry for more stories of the past's hidden corners, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Until next time, keep digging. The truth is out there sometimes, it's just hiding in plain sight.